The condition is really crazy condition.
I mean, that shouldn't give away the whole secret to professional windsurfing.
Maciek Rutkowski giving Antoine Albo a run for his body. Here we go. Woo! What a finish.
The guy is kind of talking bullshit.
The team's just got to work a little harder.
Welcome to the Windsurfing Podcast, back again for episode 5. And this week we have got a really interesting one. We're going deep inside the industry to one of the brand manager of the biggest brands in the windsurfing world. He's fought his way up from a top 10 wave sailor through the R&D process and finally stopped at the brand manager status. We're going to talk about bidding wars for riders. We're going to talk about comings and goings of some pretty big names. We're also going to talk about why has he got the nicest team in the windsurfing world. We're also going to look at the windsurfing customer and his overview of that, which is kind of interesting too, plus lots more. So who is it? Who are we talking about? Which brand? Well, we're going to talk to Craig Gertenbach, the brand manager of Fanatic.
So Craig, thanks for finding the time. You're a busy man, and these must be busy times as the whole world is kind of getting out of lockdown, and I guess your company is kind of slowly going back to normal. I mean, your company, Fanatic, is slowly going back to normal. Tell us a little bit about what's going on these days with the company and how is the outlook?
Yeah, first of all, thanks to you and to Ben for having me. And no problem. Lucky we could do it in the evening. Like you said, it's quite busy times. Let's say March, April was quite a challenging period, I think, for everybody. But for us, it was, let's say, because I live in Germany, on a personal side, it was fairly, let's say, relaxed. We didn't have a major lockdown like some of our friends in other neighboring European countries, or in my home country in South Africa, where I'm from, actually, where it was a really tough lockdown. It was a difficult time because quite a bit of uncertainty. We didn't know back then. Things look a lot better right now, but back then we didn't really know how long it was going to take and how dire the whole situation would be. And for the timing for the windsurfing market, or in general for the company, was pretty terrible because it was right in the middle of the pre-season delivery. So we start delivering around early March till about end of April. And during that time, pretty much 90% of the company's turnover fell away. And that's a pretty deep hole to try and fill. May was a very good month, so that's good, and we hear that from all our competitors as well, for all sports, especially for stand-up paddling, which is obviously a lot of people are not traveling, so they're looking for a relatively inexpensive way to get out and do sport, which is SUP. And windsurfing, kiting is also coming back very strong. Wing foiling, super in at the moment, very strong. So it's looking better than it was 2 months ago. It's going to be very hard to fulfill the goals for the year, and I think every company is realistic about that those 2 months of lost turnover will not be made up. But I mean, the main thing is, everybody in the company was, thank goodness, made it through safely, health-wise. All of our team riders and everyone in our immediate families and business partners, so far so good. So I think that's the key thing to remember for everyone. The business will go on. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of other people who had it a lot harder than we did. So, we're looking forward now to building things up again. And for me, on a personal note, it was actually we live 3 kilometers from the office, so it's not a huge difference for me. I could work quite easily from home or from here. When I'm traveling, I travel about 60 or 80 days a year anyway, so I'm used to working from the laptop. But it was quite interesting time because we weren't banned from going on the water. And the last 20 years since I've been living in Munich, I think I've been windsurfing 5 times here, because we always when I go windsurfing here locally, it's not only about wanting to go in good conditions. It's more when I go windsurfing, it's usually for work to test stuff, and you need good conditions, like you know yourself. You need constant conditions, which we then always ended up doing at Lake Garda. We'd go down the beginning of the season, take a ton of stuff, leave it there, and then we'd go every second weekend down to Lake Garda and do all our testing there, where it's quite regular wind and you can depend on the conditions. But of course, that all fell away. So we decided, okay, we're going to do some local windsurfing, and it's been incredible. The last 6 weeks, I think I've been on the water 2-3 times every week. Mostly in good weather, but occasionally in a little less good weather with, 13 degrees, pouring rain, cold water. That's part of the local experience. And
welcome to Europe, I guess. After 30 years of living here, you finally get to experience what's going on. But it's interesting you say that, because I had a very similar experience. I got back in mid-April, and I got to explore the coast and everything much more. So it was good. But back to the professional side, since we have you on, I think there is a lot of rumors, misconceptions, or general ideas how the state of the industry is. That, I don't know, that companies are bleeding, that there's not a lot of money going around, etc., etc. From what I've been getting the last couple of years, it was actually growing and looking quite well. And then obviously some guy decides to eat a bat in China. But so tell us a little bit how that looks, and maybe a little post-pandemic forecast for us as well.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up. If you think back in the last 5 years, how many new windsurfing companies came into the business and how many of them have disappeared? Basically, none of them have disappeared. They're all still there. So the market can't be that bad. And I think the misconception that people have is that there's these huge brands like Fanatic or Starboard or whatever, and that they're so much bigger than everybody else. And they have, hundreds of people working there and huge budgets and whatever. That's pretty far from the truth. And it might have been like that 20, 30 years ago. So it's not like that today. I mean, the core team that we have for Fanatic, and we're market leaders since 4 or 5 years now, is 5 people for windsurfing, SUP, and wing foiling. So that's 5 people fully focused on Fanatic. That would have been years ago 20, 30 people in those 3 sports. So the size of the main players and all of our competitors, if it's a Starboard, JP or Roberto Ricci, etc., they're all relatively small teams, and it's not huge turnovers that the companies are doing. I think the difference is now that the companies are all run for profit and more efficiently than before, than 20 years ago, let's say. People are way more aware of, when I say for profit, I don't mean that they're making huge profits. I mean that they're run efficiently so that they don't lose money, because nobody can afford to lose money with a windsurfing company anymore, or at least not a lot of money. Maybe they can offset that with stand-up paddle or kite or whatever. So the misconception that there's sort of these huge brands who have huge marketing budgets, and then the small players are so much smaller. It's not really true. There are bigger and smaller brands, but it's not what it used to be. So that's the first part of your question about how the windsurfing industry is. And because the budgets are relatively small, even for the big brands, everybody takes a lot more care of how they use those budgets. They're really efficient with them. You have a certain maximum amount that you're allowed to spend on team riders or marketing, whatever it is. And you make use of those resources as efficiently as you can. I think that windsurfing, like also when I've been windsurfing now locally, the sport is in great shape. There's lots of people on the water. There's unfortunately a lot of people in our sport who've been in that sport for way too long, who maybe experience fantastic days and not so happy anymore with the actual state of the sport. And for me, I've been in that sport for 40 years. I was windsurfing on Monday with a slalom board, having a great time. I'm not burnt out on windsurfing, but there are some people who are burned out on windsurfing. And, when you're burned out on something, maybe it's time to find something new to do. And that's normal. Just go and do it. But don't stay in the sport and always try to bring it down and always say how bad things are. And there's so many young people getting into the sport. You guys, the new generation in the professional side, there's so many kids learning windsurfing. If you take the techno class, for example, it's bigger at a lot of competitions. And I could be wrong, but I think at the World Championships, they had more people competing in techno than in the Optimist class. The last time I was in Lake.
Yeah, a couple hundred people.
500.
I don't know, yeah, like
and they
a
stopped.
few hundred, yeah.
No, 500.
500.
They stopped the limit at 500. They would have had more kids. So obviously that's more in some countries and less in some and less in others, depending on how the associations work and stuff. But the general sort of feeling that windsurfing is going down, and there's a lot of negative people, and they blame it on this and blame it on that. I don't think windsurfing is going down. I think it's actually in great shape. Wherever you go,
what's your favorite comment you keep hearing about why it's going down?
My favorite comment is actually because it's too expensive, which is, sorry, total bullshit. That's just simply not true, because the same people who were windsurfing are into kiting or other sports, and they spend just as much money, or they spend even more money on a mountain bike for 5,000 or 10,000 euros. Windsurfing is expensive, and it's never been an inexpensive sport. It was maybe 40 years ago when you bought a 25 kilogram board and you were happy to go in and out at 4 knots. Maybe then, but even then, if you take what it cost then to have that little amount of fun compared to what you get now for your money, it's a big stretch to say that it was inexpensive then. So it is an expensive sport. There's no doubt about it. You can, however, buy inexpensive equipment if you're well informed, if you go to a good shop. So that's I really hate that, I can understand for people, they say, okay, it's 2,500 euros for a board. That's really expensive. That is what it costs, unfortunately. That is what.
Yeah. And if you look, I recently just had a look at some kites, and I was shocked. I mean, you deal with it every day, but a kite, which to a windsurfer, of course, we kind of play it down a lot, but it doesn't look like much, and it's like 1,700 euros or something retail.
But
probably
that's the next thing. It's like, have a look at that kite, and then have a look at what a kite looked like 20 years ago. Take a harness from 20 years ago and look at how a harness looks today. It's completely different. The expectation from the public and the level of performance in the equipment. Take a board from now to 20 or 25 years ago. Everyone compares it back to then and sort of says, well, it's the same product, but it's not the same product. And
it's not.
Cost of labor and materials to build those products is not the same as 20 years ago. It's not the same as 10 or 5 years ago. So the expectation and the fallacy that people think, oh, the windsurfing money shops or the brands or somebody's making huge money. Nobody's making huge money, believe me. If you make 5% profit as a windsurfing company, you get the champagne out at the end of the year, believe me. And there's no shop who's making huge amount of money with windsurfing. Most of them doing it for the love of their sport. And a lot of the companies who have kite brands or SUP or whatever, they could easily stop windsurfing if they wanted to and probably still be profitable. But a lot of people who do it come from windsurfing. They've been dedicated for a long time, for many years, and they have that history and they want to support windsurfing. Take Robbie Nash, for example.
At the same time, I mean, you said it best. If the industry was so bad, there wouldn't be new brands popping up. And what is interesting, I think, how I see it is, at the very beginning, there was a bunch of like local shapers, like in surfing, maybe still recently. And then it went to all these massive brands. And it seems like now there is more and more small brands, maybe run by, literally a few people. And do you see that shift going back to that model? Or because there seems to be like less and less of what you explained as a big brand, right?
I think there's more sort of medium-sized brands, who operate quite efficiently, and who manage. The main thing is always, everybody comes along, and especially a lot of the newer brands, they come along and they think that they can make better products. And that's why they're going to start a brand, because, there's big brands, they don't know how to make good products. Okay, well, we've only been in business for 40 years. We don't know how to make products. But a lot of the time, it's not the product is the start. Yeah, that's everything, because that's what the consumer buys at the end of the day. And he needs to be totally stoked on that product. But once you have the product, there's a hell of a lot more involved, which people find out afterwards, maybe who were shapers before or team riders. So it's a bit more of an uphill battle after you have the product, because the product is, unfortunately, it's the basic part of the business, the most important part, but it's also the most basic part. And what the smaller brands often find is the distribution model is quite difficult, because there's a lot of financing involved. You buy from the supplier, let's say in January, you get it to Europe in March, you sell it to the importer, he sells it to the shop. So there's a lot of period in between where you're financing all the products. And then to find importers and agents and shops who you can work with is a huge job. It takes obviously 4 or 5 or even up to 10 years to build a worldwide distribution. So all that time, you could have been selling more if you had the distribution. Whereas you see, if an existing company starts a new brand or new sport, they have the distribution already. So it's pretty easy for them, to plug in. Like you see now, all the brands that are doing wing foiling, all the ones that have a good distribution for windsurfing or kiting, they're straight in there straight away, because they've got the distribution already. They've got all the shops, they've got all the importers. They can allocate team riders to it and resources, and have all the designers. So it's pretty easy for them to add in a product, compared to somebody who comes brand new into the thing and says, okay, I need to build up a brand, products, distribution, etc., etc.
Yeah, or like North Kite, then let's say the new North Kiteboarding did, right? I mean, from what I know, they purchased Mystic.
Yeah,
not because they like the brand, but because the distribution network was working perfectly already.
I'm sure they like the brand too. It's a good brand and had a very good distribution. So they wouldn't have bought it otherwise. Yeah. But definitely to buy into the distribution is obviously really important.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen in the last few years as well. You have these groups of companies. You've got our company, which is Boards and More, which is Fanatic, Duotone, Ion, Duotone, Windsurfing, Duotone, Kiteboarding. And then you have the Starboard, Savan, Air Rush Group. You have the Taboo Gastra Group. You have the Neil Pride Group with JP and a couple of other brands. And all these kind of brand centers, they're able to service the shops with basically a full complement of products.
Because you have your one distribution guy, you have your one social media guy, you put the photo shoot all together. So you're, as you say, you're working way more efficiently.
But also for the shop, it's obviously easier, because he can get a wetsuit, he can get a boom, he can get a fin, he can get everything he needs from one company, and then he can work with 2 or 3 of those companies and have all the stuff he needs. So it's obviously much more efficient for shipping and for everything that's connected with the distribution model.
Okay. You mentioned team riders. How was the challenge of calling the boys and telling them, look, guys?
We did split it up a little bit, actually, between, classes. Fogert is our marketing manager, who works together with my wife, who's the head of marketing. And then we have Alex from Duotone. So we split it up a little bit, because we have quite a few riders. And also I did the SUP riders. Absolutely no problem, I have to say. Everybody was very understanding. And what we tried to do at our company was to be fair. It was a bit tricky, to be honest, in March, because we didn't know how many events were going to happen. But we said they are kind of like extended employees of ours. So we tried to use the same sort of percentage reduction that we are getting ourselves, even though we're actually working more or less back to full time, still on reduced payment for the most part. So we tried to sort of treat them the same way as the full-time employees, who also got reduced but are not just, I don't want to say that the team riders are not working at the moment, because a lot of them are still very active and whatever, but obviously they don't have to. Well, they don't have to. I mean, they unfortunately can't go to some events. So it has obviously impact on their value, but on the other hand, the smart ones, and we have some smart ones for sure, otherwise they wouldn't be in our team, are obviously trying to create value for themselves and for us. So it really wasn't a big problem. I mean, nobody's happy about it. I wasn't happy about being on reduced salary, and I'm sure anybody else wouldn't be. But everybody understands it's a standard situation. I mean, I think we were quite generous with the way we did it with our guys. We're fortunate enough to be in the position to be generous with what we can do. But it's never nice. But I have to say, I didn't have one bad experience at all. And that shows me actually that we have the right riders in the team, because they're mature enough to handle the situation and understanding enough as well to know that it's the long road that counts. We have guys in our team like Goito, who's been there for 15, 18 years. Victor since 2000. I mean, we have guys in the team who've been there for a long, long time. Even the younger guys are, how can I
guess
say
this kind of answers a little bit my next question, because my next question was, the riders don't have a platform to do what they're basically paid to do, or they have, let's say, a more limited platform, because the contests are obviously probably the main thing you're paying guys for, or so my question was, you could have cut the guys completely, right? And I think some people are wondering, what do riders do at a time like this, and why do you still keep paying them? And I know the answer to that, but why don't you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I mean, any rider, you don't just get them in the team for doing PWA events. That's for sure not the main reason for it. It's an easier way to maybe select them in terms of, let's say, if you really look on a very basic way of looking at things, it's an easy way to sort of measure their position in the sport, but it's definitely not the only way to measure it. And I mean, we've had in the past riders who are way more valuable in place 20 than the guy who was valuable in place 5. So the fact that they're not able to compete is not such a big problem. It's obviously a bit of a loss to us in terms of visibility in the sport. But there's lots of other ways they can make themselves valuable, with social media especially. I mean, they're so lucky now. I mean, it's a lot of work. But, before the situation 10, 15, 20 years ago was very different. It was very hard for a rider to promote himself. You could do 15 backward somersaults on the beach and you couldn't get into the magazines, if you weren't a top rider. And that was the only way to promote yourself. And you wouldn't be getting any main positions in the PWA rankings. So for a young rider, it was really hard, other than getting really top results really quickly. It was very difficult to promote himself and make an impact. So today, the riders, at least they have the opportunity. Whether they use that opportunity or not is up to them, to create a lot of value for themselves, because it doesn't cost anything mostly except time. You know that yourself, working in social media, you can do a lot, but you need time, and obviously you need a bit of training on it as well. There's some guys who are very good in windsurfing, and there's some guys who are very good in windsurfing, but also very good in social media. And then there's some guys who are really, really good in windsurfing, not very good in social media. And it's,
it doesn't really go hand in hand.
I think in the meantime, most of the guys have understood how important it is. And we're looking at new ways to try and make the guys more valuable, and also get them maybe now, since they're not competing as much, to get them maybe more in touch with people, with clinics and that kind of stuff, which is something that we've always wanted to do more of, but because of their travel, training, photo shoots, competing schedules, we haven't always been able to do that. So I think it's a good opportunity for them as well. And maybe they'll also be understanding a little bit more about how the market really is. Sometimes not everybody understands how big or how important it is to react and interact with the customers.
Yeah. So you have quite a proper World Cup team, every discipline. You yourself are on the management board of the PWA. You've been involved one way or another in the competitive world for ages, and we'll get to your racing career and actually competitive career. How do you see now, from this standpoint, the role of this competitive world, of the PWA, of your World Cup team? as a kind of promotional tool for the brand. And if you don't mind sharing, which I probably mind, what is more or less the proportion of marketing budget that is actually spent on that alley of your promotion, let's say?
I mean, I think there's a misconception just straight away that a lot of customers say, oh, I don't need any PWA riders because it makes my board too expensive. Okay, that first of all has absolutely no value as an argument, because even if we stop sponsoring every PWA rider, your board would probably cost 5 or 10 euros less. Yeah, because the guys are not making millions, as you well know, Maciek.
Yeah.
It's a tough business, and I think most, like anybody, even
let me show my logo.
So the guys are not getting rich by it, and a lot of them, even if they're making kind of an okay living, they're basically doing because they love to compete. And I think that's the key thing in any sport, is that the main driver, especially in smaller sports, niche sports, it's not about the money. If it's the industry, or if it's us, or if it's the riders, it's not so much about money. And I think the PWA has the potential, and in the past was very influential in influencing brand visibility and rider visibility. Obviously, it was a great marketing tool. I think it still is, in terms of the fact that the riders who compete there are measured as the best sailors in the world. That means, for me, the best sailor in the world is also the one who makes crap conditions look amazing, not just ripping in one spot. Sorry to say, that's for me the best riders. In the slalom discipline, I think it does a fantastic job of promoting the sport. Unfortunately, at the moment, since a couple of years now, we've been struggling a little bit getting the number of wave events and freestyle events to fully utilize sort of the talent and the visibility of the riders in those disciplines, which is a bit of a shame, because we had a good role. If you remember, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had 5 or 6 wave events, and things were actually looking really good. And then due to whatever circumstances, it didn't work out quite as good. So we're working on that, on the PWA. I would actually really enjoy to see an interview by yourself with Jimmy and Rich, for example, to clear up a few things about the PWA, so people understand the structure of how it works, instead of always,
Jimmy's interview is done, just to let you know.
Perfect. Yeah. No, so people can understand the background of, it's a riders association, and if we want change, the riders have to change what the minimum levels are, etc. But I think your question about the percentage of total marketing, it's a discussion I have every year with our CEO. It's pretty high, to be honest. It's a lot higher than on other things that we have spendings on. Obviously, you have a ton of other costs that are involved in running a brand. If it's social media, if it's an agency that does the graphics, there's loads and loads. We support a lot of national athletes as well, but it's a pretty big percentage. It's a percentage that is probably too high in terms of, I'd prefer to spend a little less on the athletes and a bit more money on actually utilizing them and promoting them. But we want to support it as much as we can. So we kind of, how can I put this?
You need the guy and you need the package around the guy. And you
need
put
the money to promote the guy as well, but often there's not enough for both. So a lot of the time what you end up doing is giving the athlete the money or the resources and letting him run with it. And that's very important, to choose the right guy that that he's going to do that for you anyway. So that you give him enough resources to be able to promote himself, which then obviously ends up promoting the brand too. So that's really important. What you don't need is give somebody X amount of money and then he's like, okay, well, that's it. I'm only going to do, I'm going to keep 50% of the money and stay at home all year and then go and do 2 contests. That's not helpful for us and not for the athlete either. I mean, if you see what Kai Lenny, for example, invests in himself to promote himself, all those great videos and stuff are not coming from somebody else. he's taking the sponsorship money that he gets and he invests a massive amount, or his sponsors invest that amount to promote himself. A very smart move. So he has a full-time camera team following him around all day long.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a little bit out of our league at the moment for windsurfing, unless you're probably, winning world titles.
It is out of our league, but it's a good example of a way to invest back into yourself. If you're in a fortunate position, not everybody is, obviously.
100% true. You mentioned choosing the right guys, and here I'm going to grill you a little bit, because it does seem, whether it's true or not, you're gonna verify this, but it does seem like Boards and More or yourself prefer the quiet model citizen, the guy that is not very opinionated, not necessarily the wannabe rock star, like, I don't know, like myself maybe, or tell me where this comes from, because for me, growing up in the sport, I see the biggest stars being kind of bad boys, like Robbie Nash, Robert Teritiao, Josh Stone, Polakau. They all have this, strong kind of image.
Yeah.
And what you're promoting is a little bit, let's say, more German, for lack of a better word.
So I'm not sure Victor is happy to be called a German or Goito.
Hopefully they don't watch. They don't have the time.
Although Victor Goito's last garage video, you would think he's Swiss and not German from the organization skills. We do. I'd say that what we really look for actually is team players. So somebody who can integrate into a team. And that's generally quite hard to have really, how would you say, characters who maybe are more used to getting all the attention. We've had a couple of times team riders where they've been coming from a brand where they were the only rider in the brand, and then came to our team and they were one of four in a discipline, or one of five in a discipline. And it's quite hard to integrate someone like that into the team, because they want me. They want attention all the time. And you don't have that attention to give them. We don't have 5 people focused just on team riders. I do the contracts with them. I'm the brand manager. I run our forum. I do the products, class, my wife, everybody else who's involved, Daniel. Everyone's really busy. So you need riders who are going to take care of themselves, and they're going to take care of making a good image for you and the brand. What we've actually also tried to do is mostly focus on European riders, because that's where most of the contests happen, and find riders who are quite happy to use the boards from our shaper, which is also something really important that we implemented actually after that nice discussion that happened on Instagram recently. I had to hold my fingers back on the keyboard not to comment there, because there was a few times Fanatic was mentioned and people were saying that all the brands riders are using custom boards, etc. Blah blah blah.
Why don't you brief us in? I mean, I can brief the first bit where Bernd Rodiger basically came out saying that he never liked Nash anyway because he used custom boards anyway, and basically everybody's a sellout for being on for kind of lying to the public that what they use is production boards and it's not, etc., which I found a little bit too much, maybe.
A couple of things really wrong with that whole scenario. First of all, why is it on Instagram? Why does International Windsurfing Tour, they do a great job, great tour, but why do they think it's necessary to take a young guy like that, post his comments up against the biggest legend in the sport, basically, on a topic? And then I was reading their comments why they did it, that it's an industry-wide thing and it impacts the whole industry, which quite honestly Thomas Traversa and Alex Mussolini explained very clearly. It might have been 20 years ago or 10 years ago. It certainly isn't anymore. and I saw some other comments from other riders as well, it's not really the industry standard anymore. There might be one or two brands who are doing it and one or two riders who are letting their riders get boards from a very well-known shaper, Mr. Keith Tabul, who's a fantastic guy, best shaper for sure for Hookkeeper boards. There's no doubt about it. And but it's not an industry-wide thing anymore. And we stopped it actually already in 1997 with our riders and said, listen, we have a new shaper who was new, relatively new at that time. And we said any rider is coming onto the team has to work with him. And when Francisco Goya came on the team, he had to work with Sebastian. He was actually the only guy he got some boards from Keith and had a budget with Keith as well. But he really helped Sebastian to develop as a shaper, and super thankful for that. You know, it was a really great time working with Francisco, and we saw each other recently at the boat, and you know, he's done a fantastic job with the brand that he has as well. But since Francisco left the team, it's always been a really, really key thing for us. If we sign a rider, that he uses our shapers boards, regardless if it's production or custom. And I think you will have to look really hard in marketing materials from most of the main brands to find something where they claim that everyone uses production boards. I mean, that's so old hat. I don't think we've ever done that. The guys use a combination of production and custom boards. And I think most of the main brands, the guys are riding boards from their shapers. The exception is, of course, Hookkeeper, as you well know, is just a completely different ballgame. And if you want your riders to ride production boards, you're going to end up making boards that,
don't work anywhere else. Yeah.
Don't work anywhere else, just there, you know. So our production boards work okay in Hookkeeper. They're good. But of course, if you're on the absolute top level where you're popping out a Wave 360 and a tweaked air and a whatever, all on one wave, on a really steep, fast wave, you need more tail rocker than you will in Klitmøller or Pozzo. Clear. And I think everyone knows that. Everyone knows that the guys are using, in that one particular spot, custom boards. So
what would you be? What would your response be? Because for me, I don't really blame the IWT so much for trying to generate. The industry is, or the whole windsurfing world is generally quite a peaceful, quiet place. It's not like the music world or the other sports, bigger sports world, where you have haters and you have all these kind of battles in the comments and all that. So maybe IWT just tried to create a little traffic. And he said that. It's not like he didn't say that, so I don't blame for them. But what would your response be? What were you holding your fingers from riding?
I think it's what I was holding my fingers from riding was that I don't think it's fair to match those two people up against each other. You know, Robbie is an icon in our sport, and he's done more for windsurfing and still does. You know, every time he shows up somewhere for windsurfing, there's a queue. I mean, you try and have a meeting with Robbie. I was on Silt a few years ago. We're sitting there and you're having a discussion about something serious, and people just come right in the middle of the discussion. They don't care. They want an autogram. And I said, how do you put up with it? And he said, well, that's the job. And he does it. And he's flown around the world 7 times every year, a couple of times. He's got, I think, 7 million miles or whatever it is on his account. He doesn't have to do that. He's a multimillionaire. He could stop anytime. He could have turned his back on windsurfing like a lot of people did that went straight to kiting or to other sports. He still sells windsurfing products. And apparently he was paying for custom boards for someone to use at Hookkeeper. So he was making it possible for them. If somebody claimed that the team riders of Nash were using production boards, I'd be surprised if they said that. I think it's hard for someone like Bernd to understand how the whole marketing thing works. For sure, if he doesn't feel authentic about it, then perhaps he shouldn't have gone to that brand if that's how it was. But of course, times are tough and you look for support any way you can. I just don't think that it was cool of the IWT to bring those two guys up against each other. I think there would have been a much better way of doing it, would be to pose the question themselves. You know, is that the way it works? Do all brands do that? Instead of bringing two people against each other, which maybe...
Yeah, it's a bit like bringing Floyd Mayweather against myself or whatever and put it in a boxing ring.
Oh, you take him down. Come on.
I got like 15 kilos on him, so maybe.
Even if Paul is right. No, I think it wasn't very cool, and yeah, it was just not nice to see. Because to be honest with you, Robbie has done a lot for the sport. He has his way of running his windsurfing company, and same way as us, we don't make boards just for Hookkeeper. And everybody knows that Quattro is making boards for a few riders, and I think nobody has a problem with it. It's definitely not in the majority like it used to be. And I think it's great that Robbie is investing again into, Ricardo, Justina. I think it's fantastic. He's breathing some new life back into his windsurfing brand. He's out there shredding, windsurfing, having a great time. He's doing other sports. He could easily turn his back on windsurfing and just say, hey, I don't make any money with windsurfing, or I don't make enough money with windsurfing. He could easily do it, but he doesn't. Yeah. And I think that's something you have to respect really a lot, because he's been in it for 40 years.
Exactly. Once we're at quotes and sort of controversial stuff, let me read you one thing, and maybe you can tell me who said that and what do you think of this. Yeah. Losing riders is never good, especially if they have been with the brand for a longer time. Take Matteo, for example. We took him from a top 20 rider and put him on the podium, narrowly missing a world title within 2 years. Similar with Brasinho. But you have to accept that sometimes the guys simply have better chances at other brands to fully exploit their financial rewards and move on.
Did I write that?
Yes, you did. And I have to say that you were very, let's say, smooth and kind of nice just with the burn thing and whatever. But I have to say, this sounds maybe a little bit bitter.
Really?
Or
okay, I don't know. Yeah, it's always a perspective. I think it sounds pretty professional to let them that was the case with both of those guys. They had a better financial offer. We tried to match it, wasn't possible for us, and in the end both of them went sort of into a situation where they became, especially Brasinho, as the main Goya rider, and he's bloomed in that position, and he was able to make a lot of boards with Keith at the beginning. Now he's riding a lot of production boards, so he obviously helped them develop their range, and it was a perfect fit for him living on Maui. So no problem, and I think he's done really well there. And Francisco has also done very well. I mean, Francisco helped us to get at the time Victor into the team, and at the time Jonas Ceballos and those guys before he left. And at the same time, I think Matteo, what are you going to do? You got number 2 and number 3 in the world. It's kind of hard to keep both of them happy financially, and of course the service that goes with that. So we're pretty disappointed when both of them left, but we're still on good speaking terms with all of them, and try not to be, as I said in that quote, they should make the most of what they can, and we don't hold any grudges there whatsoever. And it's good to see that Matteo was able to go and get his world title. And I mean, last year's action in the World Cup was amazing, with Pierre winning and all those amazing slalom action from Numea and from Fuerteventura. It was just up and down. It's been fantastic battle to watch that all develop, and the same with Brasinho. No, I mean, to watch him, was it last year in Silt, right, where he did so well?
Yeah, he definitely had a few there where I think he battled back in the double
exactly
last year in Silt.
Yeah.
But so let's rewind back to that situation. You have 2 young guys in your team who are doing absolutely amazing. They come 2 and 3 in the world. Actually, Matteo comes into the last event leading the world title race. He has a bit of a tough time. It happens. It's the first time he's there. Are you not tempted to just throw the cash at these guys and give them one more run? Are you not, as a competitive guy, which you obviously are you not like, okay, let's freaking destroy the world of slalom for a year,
Put it this way: the way our company is run is a little different to some of the other ones. I mean, we have all the budgets in one. So because we run the business for Europe, like we have the European, UK budget, Italian budget, everything in one. So we see the business very top to bottom. Whereas if you're sitting in an importer situation and you're selling the boards to importers, and you have quite a pot of marketing cash, you might say, I don't care. I want to do it and I want to have it. We did stretch what we could for those two riders, but there's also a certain point where it doesn't make sense. And I've seen some really weird stuff for the last few years where riders that I was prepared to pay X amount get into a bidding match with other companies where, to be honest, we weren't even doing it intentionally. I just wanted to see how far the other company would go, and it was ridiculous. Like, doesn't make sense.
That's
And
insane.
up and up. And you thought, what is the other person thinking? I mean, where are they getting that money from? Well, we did that once, just out of more or less out of spite, because the guy was being ridiculous about it. And we didn't want to lose that rider either. So it's, sometimes there's not much sense in it. Like you say, or like you said, maybe we're too German and too organized, and yeah, we try to to be realistic about what it's worth, and sometimes just doesn't make sense, and it's not sustainable. That's the next thing, you know. You pay the guy.
It would be a rental. It would be for 1 year, and
Exactly. And then you start having to kick out other riders who are doing a good job just because the one guy has got a better offer. And I don't like that. I mean, that's the next thing with our team, as you said, that they're all really nice guys and whatever, and low key or whatever, but they're also a little bit part of the family over the years that you build up with them. And you know how that is when you get in a team and you get in much closer relationship. You know, you're not just paying checks, and it's not like a big sport or something. There's a bond between everybody. And obviously there's still a kind of employer-employee relationship, but there's a closer bond a lot of the time with the guys, and you spend a lot of time with them, and you don't want to just kick somebody out because the other guy wants to have more money.
Yeah. So Matteo was on the show, and he revealed that, you know, after he left to go to 0.7, starboard and 0.7, obviously that next year he won in Silt. And then he goes back home and he reads Pierre in a French magazine complaining about basically the team, the 0.7 team, sort of team racing or helping Mattel to an extent where he didn't believe it was fair. And I know you were caught up right in the middle of that sort of, wouldn't call it a mess, but scenario. Yeah. And I'm very curious how it looks from your side, because on one hand you have to support your guy. He's your guy. He's fighting for the world title. On the other, you know, because you did race on the PWA Tour, that team racing is probably harder than winning a world title. It's close to impossible to race that way.
Not so sure about that. We've seen some pretty nasty team racing back in my day as well. I won't say who it was, but there was some times where there was a certain person that nobody wanted to win, and others would do anything, to make sure that didn't happen. In the case of Pierre and Matteo, it's really hard to judge. Like you say, it's really very difficult to team race and to position yourself. And I think the bigger problem is that because at that time there was a lot of very good guys in the 0.7 team, including Andrea. So there were always 2 or 3 or 4 guys on 0.7 in the semifinals or even in the finals. So percentage-wise, there's a very good chance that you got a black sail on top of you or below you or whatever. So, and then there's certain guys who are pretty gung-ho on the start, and yeah. Things can happen. I saw 1 or 2 situations where I thought it wasn't cool, but if it was team racing or not, I'm not sure if you could qualify it as that. But you can certainly, in Pierre's position, you see that black sail on the left of you, on the right of you, blocking you. You could get that impression. I'm quite sure, actually, yeah, as an athlete. Yeah.
Okay, give us a little lowdown behind the scenes. A situation like that pops up, emails start flying around. What happens? How do you put it? Because all of this is what I mean about windsurfing being such a nice sport. It's such a, let's say, not everything is out there. If you had a situation like that in basketball or football, there is a reporter that would get a smell of that, and would run with it. While in windsurfing, a lot of these situations are kind of calmed behind closed doors and on emails. So
I think, like you say, it's a really small industry. I mean, I know Andrea, we see each other at Lake Garda, we go windsurfing, we go biking together. I have huge respect for what he's done in the sport. It's not easy to start your own brand and run it the way he does, and full respect to him. So from that point of view, I wouldn't want to involve myself in something like that. That's something that should be sorted out on the race course. If I would see it and really start noticing that it is a very clear problem and a clear issue, I would probably speak to him directly about it and mention it. I wasn't convinced at the time that it was 100% that way. There were a few situations where I thought, it's kind of on the edge. But if I thought it was really on purpose, I would have contacted him. I think that's what you do among respected colleagues in the sport. Gentleman approach is always sometimes nicer than getting too upset. I mean, that you get upset when your rider gets taken out at the mark, or with what happened with Tati and Pierre. Of course, you get upset when you see that and you shout at the screen and get angry about it. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not the football World Cup. Huh? It's a windsurfing race, and every day of training is still a hell of a lot better than going to the football stadium to kick balls around, or swimming, watching the black line going underneath,
Definitely. Or swimming competitively. That's probably the biggest nightmare. Okay.
I think it has to be kept in perspective.
Yeah. Enough grilling, enough team riders. You came out quite smoothly. Let's go back to you and your career, because even though there is not much track of it, I couldn't find results, PBA.
Like before there was the internet, man.
Yeah, I don't have these magazines. I mean, Poland in the 80s didn't have any windsurfing magazine. So tell us.
In the 90s, not in the 80s.
Early 90s. Early 90s. I was born in the 90s. So anyway. So tell us, because you did pretty much all the disciplines and racing was probably your strongest one. You've been in the top 10 on the ranking. Tell us how good you actually were. Like, I don't know, let's say you take a guy, like you say, I don't know, of today, I was a Maciek Rutkowski, let's say, more or less. Or
how good I thought I was at the time, or how good I realized I was now is the difference. Yeah, when you're 21 and doing the World Cup, you think you're the greatest. Yeah, I mean, I started off in the end of the 80s. I was doing the South African circuit. That's where I come from South Africa. I won the national tour there 2 or 3 times, and our local provincial thing. And then there were 3 of us who went to the World Cup in 91, and I competed full time from 93 to 97. We had to do all 3 disciplines, which course racing I hated basically, but we had to do it. And slalom I quite enjoyed. I was actually the best in waves. Just now I'm only 78 kilos, and back then I was 72 kilos. So it was really a tough battle for being competitive. All the big boys were 90, 95 kilos, weight jackets, custom boards. It was a tough time to be a light guy in racing, and you had to do the racing. Even Jason Polliger had to do the racing the first couple of years. Of course, he's much more talented than me, so he did quite well in it. Or Francisco was doing the slalom at the time as well. It was a good time. I mean, I had some good results in the waves that I was happy with. Couple of top 10 results, I think the best ranking I ever had was 6 at one stage. And I finished the year in 95 and 11th in the waves. It was okay. That was probably about where I would have been between place 10 and 20. I don't think top 10 would have been quite there. I had some 5th and 9th and 7th and beat, actually, I was quite proud a few times, all the guys who were world champions in a few years after that. But, you know, I was very good with wind from the left, can still sail okay with wind from the left in the waves. I was terrible with wind from the right. The first years in Ukipa were terrible, getting washed on the rocks every day, and I still hated. So I was happy with the career I had. I had a little bit problems with injuries at the end of the career in 96 and 97. I hurt my knee in both years. But I was working at the same time that I started my windsurfing career. I started working for F2 in South Africa in the end of the 80s. First project was actually the F2 Sunset. You might remember that board. Might have heard of it. And we did a lot of work then on the sails for Arrows. And then I worked for Neil Pride for a while, and I was sponsored by them as well. And then I started with Fanatic actually in 95. And my thing was always, because it was from South Africa, same as Poland, small market for windsurfing, that we didn't have much sponsorship locally, and also then obviously from the big brands. So I did a lot of work in R&D to support my travels and to be part of the World Cup. So I would be doing a lot of testing in Tarifa for ART and for Fanatic between the World Cups, and then going to the World Cup more or less taking the sails for Nick Baker or for any of the guys that we've been developing for them. And so that was a bit tricky at that time, because obviously all the other guys had been training for the World Cup and I'd been testing freeride sails or whatever it was. I think you've done enough testing for your sponsors as well, so you know how it is. It's quite hard to fit that all in.
Yeah.
And yeah, back in those days, things were pretty different. There was more money for riders, but you had a hell of a lot more costs. You know, we would spend 30 or 40,000 Deutschmark a year or dollars a year on boards alone. You know, $2,000 on checking in, and that 18 events a year, 15, 18 events a year. So it's different times, different challenges. It was good times, but
Not
I'm
bad.
glad I did it.
You mentioned South Africa, born and raised in Cape Town.
Yeah.
How was that in, I guess, not to put you on the spot too much, but let's say 70s and 80s?
Yeah.
How was it there? Because all we think about from that time is, you know, the struggle of the country and you know, a lot of political things, a lot of racial things, which unfortunately we experience now, maybe not in a similar fashion. But just tell us how it was as a kid and through a kid's eyes when you were just roaming the streets of Cape Town.
It's funny because I thought you might mention that given the situation we had last week in America, and also this week with the protests and stuff. And growing up in South Africa in the 70s and the 80s, which is when I grew up, I was born in 68. So you were very separated from the whole black population, basically. I mean, we weren't sort of a family that had, you know, a bunch of servants or something. We had maybe a maid who came a couple of times a week or something. So you didn't actually really have that much contact with black people, other than when you would see them working in whatever position they would work at. It was kept very separate. I mean, so you didn't, as a younger person, obviously when you're, let's say, a child all the way till 13, 14, 15, even up to 18, you weren't really aware of the situation that was going on in terms of apartheid. I mean, you know how it is. When you're 15 or 16, you're way more interested in yourself than what's going on in the world. And
I was
really
interested in girls, not in myself.
Yeah, exactly. And other things. And yeah, so and it's hard for people to imagine now because there was no social media then. So, you know, not every 10-year-old is walking around with a phone. So you're just completely cut off from the world. I mean, I had no idea what Europe was about, even though we studied a lot of European history and stuff. You wouldn't know what was going on in the next town. I mean, nowadays you have your smartphone, you know exactly what just happened in X, Y, Z countries, what's going on. So you were kept very separated. When I went to university, that was kind of the wake up call, because then it was a mixed university, and we had a lot of really cool sort of protest bands that we used to watch, and then you started to realize, because the songs they were singing and we were all having a good time with, they were banned. And so it could be that anytime the police would come in and try to arrest everybody and that kind of stuff. And that's when it first started sort of going through your head. But besides that, up until 18, you didn't really realize what was going on, to be honest with you. And then I left actually South Africa around when I was 20, 21. And I missed kind of that period where, where Nelson Mandela was released and where apartheid was abolished. And I was mostly overseas during that time. So I saw the changes, but I was mostly overseas for sort of 10, 11 months a year. So I would see the changes just once a year. And in the beginning, it was fantastic. The Rainbow Nation, there was so much inspiration from Nelson Mandela that everybody felt very hopeful and that they could be included in the new South Africa. The president who came afterwards, Mbeki, was unfortunately not bringing that same sort of unity in the country. And then, of course, everybody knows what happened with Zuma, who came afterwards, who basically wrecked the whole economy and all the corruption that came with it. Now we have a quite big problem in South Africa, even before the coronavirus, that there's still a lot of racial tension. So it's
unfortunately, I think the way I see it, having been there, I don't know, 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years, it's not, there is no easy solution, because those people, they were separated for such a long time that integrating them into what we know as normal, it takes time and it takes effort from everybody, and unfortunately, still to this day, I see it, it's not separated as it used to be, of course, but unfortunately, it's not like, it's I see what you see on the streets is not a pretty sight, for sure.
No, and it's definitely going to get worse now with the amount of unemployed people due to Corona. But if you take the time to read the news and see what the political party that's in power there has done the last 26 years, and still blames everything on apartheid. Unfortunately, they haven't used the resources that they had in hand to uplift the nation and uplift the people. Of course, it will not take 26 years. It'll take 50 years or 80 years to get it to a similar level. But if you read all the books that have been written by very independent journalists over the last few years about the amount of corruption that's happened there and the amount of wasted resources and literally stolen money, you'll see that it's not a black-white thing as much as it looks from the outside. There's a lot of reasons why the transformation that Nelson Mandela was so good in getting everybody and excited about, and the hope that everybody had. There's a lot of reasons why that hasn't happened. It's not only because of the corruption. There's, of course, like any society, if you have wealth, it's a hell of a lot easier to hold on to that wealth than it is to create wealth. And of course, the whites had the advantage for many, many years. So the standard of living is quite high for a lot of people, which if they went to Europe with the qualifications they had, they probably wouldn't have that standard of living, which is why a lot of them don't leave. There's a lot of people going to be leaving soon, though, because I think the crime rate is going to go through the roof now. It's already very bad. And with the amount of unemployed people that are going to be now on the streets, it's going to be even tougher. But I mean, you see that now, how badly things are run. The government is doing very little to support the people who are starving or help them. And it's all volunteers from society, regardless if they're black, white, colored, who are actually taking care of the people down there. The government has botched the whole Corona thing completely. I mean, they've done such a mess. And It's a very complex theme, but let's say it's not so much a black-white thing anymore as it used to be. The government, the ANC, would like to paint it that way, but it's definitely the middle class black people, working class younger people. They understand that something hasn't happened, that somebody's basically run them under the bus, and it's not only that the white man is to blame for that. That's for sure.
Yeah,
But
shifting
it's
gears.
complex. It's a very complex theme. It's I've read quite a lot about it, but I don't claim to be an expert on it. But yeah,
Shifting
shame.
gears a little bit back to windsurfing, or back to you. How does a South African windsurfer, globetrotter, multi-language speaker, etc., wind up in Bavaria, out of all places, in the middle of the Alps, in the middle of no water, landlocked?
Plenty of water, lots of lakes. It's a series of coincidences. I mean, the funny thing is, when I was traveling in the first years, when I worked for F2 in the early 90s, I actually spent a lot of time here at the same office where we are now, and ended up living there 20 years later. And my boss at the time was Klaus Walter, who was the sail designer for Arrows. He ended up living in South Africa. And I working in the same company as him 20 years later, living in Germany. So we always laugh about that. No, it was a series of coincidences. I lived in France before when I was doing the World Cup. Then I moved to Tarifa for a couple of years, and then I met my current wife, or my only wife, actual wife. And we both ended up working at, I was already working at Fanatic, and she was just started working at Boards and More. And we had a sort of a long distance relationship. And then a position came up in the company, basically, which I really wanted to have. I'd had enough of being a beach monkey. I was doing a lot of testing in Tarifa, and it was just time to do the next thing. I think I was 30 or 29 or 30, and I'd been basically traveling for 12 years, doing the beach thing, competing, testing equipment. And it was just time to do the next level. And that was an exciting position.
What position was it?
Yeah, unfortunately not the best timing, because I was working for ART with Robert Stroy, who became the Neo Pride designer after. And I moved to Munich in April, and I think in May, June, there was a time of Boards and More where they brought all the companies together. They decided to stop actually with ART because financially it wasn't making sense. So I only had that job for about 2 months, and then I just moved full time into Fanatic. So it wasn't a big problem for me, because I had obligations already for Fanatic with all the testing and stuff, and they integrated me nicely into the team there. So it was a bit of a shaky start. I moved in and they were basically firing people left, right, and center. There was a bit of a shock to the system, and but it worked out quite nicely. We had a couple of years which were really tough with Boards and More, where the management unfortunately couldn't make the right decisions, where we had Jacobs Coffee. They bought all the main brands in windsurfing, put them all together in one company, and then expected them all to be as successful as before, which was obviously a recipe for disaster. And over a period of 8 or 9 years, we managed to sell off Mistral and F2 and reduce the portfolio to a number of working brands, and do a couple of other moves, which really helped us to grow as a company. And since then, it's just been really successful. So
why did you why keep Fanatic and North Sails and not F2, which probably when you entered Boards and More was the biggest one, and then probably Mistral would be maybe the second biggest, and then
yeah, I mean, I think the biggest in terms of image, yes. I wouldn't like to put numbers down on it, but I'm pretty sure that when they bought Fanatic, it was a profitable business, and that the other two were maybe not profitable, or certainly not on very solid financial ground. That's why they put all three together, actually. So And then as things developed in the beginning, when we had all three brands, it became pretty clear that Fanatic was the brand that made the most business sense and was doing the best in the market at the time. And then there were a few other reasons for selling off the other two and for stopping a couple of brands. F2 was also, of course, active in snowboarding. So it was a good brand to sell in terms of that you had a good product portfolio. And with Mistral, it was a very strong brand name also for licensing. You know, the guys who bought it were straight into licensing with clothing and other things. So it was a good move. We were fortunate that Fanatic stayed inside the group and that we were able to flourish together with North Sails at the time, now Duotone, and grow the portfolio. We added Ion, a few years after that, and it's been a great ride since then, for sure.
How does an ex-competitor, then R&D worker, for lack of a better word, then I guess some sort of product manager, how does one become a brand manager of?
I think I was lucky. Put it this way, when we had all the different brands in the house, there was a few people put in as brand managers who were poorly qualified for the job, and they were out relatively quickly. I was lucky enough that the people that I worked with when I came into the company first as product manager, I had all the experience. I knew a lot about marketing from World Cup, organizing photo shoots. So I had a lot of basic skills already, and I was able to learn the set of skills year by year, instead of just being dumped into a position. And I think that's always been the big problem. Obviously, if you get put into a position that you're not ready for, it's really hard to fulfill that position, especially if it's a higher position in a company, because you have to make decisions and every decision costs you. Perhaps you only have a chance to make 2 or 3 mistakes instead of maybe in a huge company where maybe you'll make mistakes for 10 years and nobody will really realize it. But in a smaller company, the impact is obviously huge. So I was lucky that I could build those skills every year, from marketing, sales, product management, and then overall brand management. And of course, when I became brand manager in 2004, some people were a little surprised and thought, maybe not ready for that position, but it worked out pretty well, actually. I was quite happy.
You were already old.
Yeah.
No, but what I'm asking, because I keep having this discussion.
The guys were quite a bit older than me. That's why I say that. They were quite a bit older and also more experienced and coming more from a sort of a classic, studied and worked in the company for 15 years or whatever. And I was really one of the first kind of, at that time in our company, one of the first athletes to come into the thing. Whereas, Patrice, Roberto, Svein, all the guys have made their own companies now, which personally I find great, because those guys have a rich history in the sport and respect from everybody as well.
Yeah, this is what I actually I keep having these discussions, namely actually with Matteo, because he always claims that the sport should be run by people qualified to run marketing and management and these kind of operations that don't necessarily have to be well grounded in windsurfing. Whereas my idea is that it's easier to learn management than the windsurfing world throughout, which, already at this stage, I have, let's say, 10 years of, let's say, professional experience inside the sport one way or another, right? So what do you think it is? Because Fanatic seems to be run mostly on, people very much rooted in the sport rather than people with specific education or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the Fanatic team, if you look, there's myself. I come from athlete background. Klaus Vogel is our marketing manager. Also, Danny Ebele is our product manager. He was former athlete and is now a product manager. And then my wife, who's a very keen windsurfer, but comes more from the business side. She learned everything from the beginning, worked at Neil Pride for a long time. I think both ways is possible. I think it's always very easy to criticize the windsurfing industry and business till you've actually worked in it. A lot of time, the athletes think because they're sponsored by a windsurfing company that they know how the windsurfing business works. Some of them do, and some of them perhaps don't understand how it works, but it's also very different from company to company. So there may be some instances where people who are working in marketing or product management come from an athlete side and are maybe not suited to a job in the office. And we've seen that many times in our company as well, that, people come into a windsurfing company and, I'm going to go windsurfing all the time. This is great. That's not what you're there for. You're there to make sure that the guys who do go windsurfing, get the best equipment, that you get the best designs from the designers. And if you're lucky, on your weekends and in your holidays, and then occasionally at a meeting, or if you get to go on a test trip, you'll also go windsurfing. But you're not getting paid if you go to the office to go windsurfing. That's not what your job is. And so you can be passionate about it, but perhaps the expectations sometimes are wrong, and then maybe the wrong type of person gets put into a position where maybe a more classic education would be better. But I don't think you can generalize and say that. I think you definitely need people who love windsurfing and who are ready to go the extra mile for it, that's for sure. Whether they're an athlete or just a keen windsurfer, but somebody who doesn't windsurf at all, difficult.
Yeah. So you go that extra mile for the brand to be successful, but how do you actually, and this goes from brand to brand, but how do you actually quantify that success? Is it income? Is it turnover? Is it boards sold? Is it world titles? What is it in Fanatic that you say like, oh, okay, that year was successful?
Yeah, I mean, of course, to keep your job, obviously, you have to be financially successful, and to make sure that everybody else keeps their jobs, including the team riders. So the financial success of the company is really important, and that's something we have to keep a really good eye on, because you're not making huge profits, and things can go wrong really quickly if you're doing small turnovers. But if I look at for us with Fanatic, was never now we're number one in the market, not by a huge amount compared to the other brands. That's at least what the main supplier tells us. But I don't think there was ever really the sort of that we work towards that goal. We want to be number one. We want to sell more boards than anybody else. That was never really the thing. What we want to do is make some really good boards and really stoke people out on windsurfing, and have a good time doing it as well. Enjoying being part of something, and not sitting in the office till 300 days a year, but actually being out there sometimes, being involved in the whole thing, and having a good time, creating something. And it's a combination of things. It's results, just magazine results, sometimes team rider results. Team rider results are always it's like an extra little thing on the top. It's nice. It's really cool to see, because you're stoked for the rider first of all, and it's a little bit of a reward for the brand as well. But it's not the only thing that you run the company on. The same way as you might make a bottom line which is good in 1 year. Yeah, okay, that's not something that you think about the whole year. The main thing is you're really excited. The same way when you had your first windsurfing board, I don't know how many years ago, when you open that box, or even if you buy a used board, when you get that board in your hands, it's the same way for us. You might get tired of opening boxes, but when you see that new board, that's what gets you really excited, and you say, wow, something is really cool here. Or when you're testing a prototype and you come out of the water with a smile on your face, those are the things that are like the big moments.
Yeah, for slalom sailors is always getting new fins and new masts. You're like, this is gonna be the one. This is for let it be. Come on, let it be the one. The one that gives me the extra board length. But you mentioned creativity, you mentioned excitement, but the little bit that I know you from discussions around the PWA, etc., you're not exactly the guy that jumps onto the onto the new trends, onto the hype, onto the, you know, gimmicks, let's say.
It's true.
Is it something that is, because I'm a little bit like that in life, like most of the time, first time I listen to a song, I hate it, and then I grow to like it or whatever. Is it something that you have as a person and you put it in the business, or is it something that the business taught you to kind of let the trend develop and then jump onto it and milk it when it's ready to get milked?
As a person, I'm not like that. Generally, I'm a bit more conservative and a bit more, most of the time, pretty modest, and try to stay a little bit more in the background. I don't try to push myself in front of everybody. As a brand manager, you have to obviously be present. And from a product point of view, our shaper Sebastian, who's been making the boards now since 1994, is also a man of clean lines. So he has a relatively conservative but very reliable and methodical approach to the way he makes the boards. And a lot of the time we've seen some trends come and go, and we haven't always jumped on them. I'm quite stoked that in the last few years, with our stubby thing that we came along with, which we integrated into our free ride boards and our free wave boards, that's been a great success for us. And we had some pretty legendary designs in freestyle boards as well. But the gimmicks and the super trends, maybe it's just not for us. We don't chase it.
I looked through your Instagram though. You jumped on the winging thing.
The winging thing, I was skeptical at the beginning, like a lot of people, definitely. Yeah, the wing thing is actually a lot of fun because, yeah, but that's a different thing. It's something that it just gets you out more on the water. Enjoy it. It's fun. It's, for me, it's a way of doing a bit of freestyle, which I was always useless at. And you have that feeling of playfulness when you're on the water, which I don't find so much with windsurf foiling. Windsurf foiling is super fun to go in and out and in light winds and planing. I'm a little scared.
Let's face it, you hated that at the beginning as well.
I prefer to go slalom sailing, that's for sure. That's still what I really like to do, if there's good wind. But more and more, especially now with, as I said at the beginning, being more locally on the water here, you see the sense of the foiling, and you see the foiling growing everywhere, because it just makes sense for gusty lakes and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, the wing foiling is fun. It's like anything, you know. Kiting is fun too if you want to do some jumps and have a bit of fun and ride some waves. It's also fun.
Not get too tired also.
Exactly. Yeah. Same with SUP. You know, I was out SUPing 2 nights ago. I was windsurfing 3 days ago. It's all fun. You don't need to make it about being the best thing. And even if you're really passionate about windsurfing, you think it's the greatest sport. Yeah, well then that's great. I also think it's the greatest sport, but I'm also open to do other things. And when I was 20, I didn't think there was anything except windsurfing. So I can understand how people like that. I mean, I was like, windsurf, nothing else. Just the only thing there is.
Yeah, you've been windsurfing now for about 40 years, I guess. You mentioned it yourself. I'm not throwing it out there, so don't get angry. Where do you think the sport is going, and where do you see the major, I don't want to say revolution, because we've seen evolution more than revolution, but where do you think it's going?
I think it's been very exciting the last few years to see what foiling has done for the sport, because most importantly, and what everyone forgets, is that windsurfing became a planing sport at one stage. And that meant that a lot of locations just weren't interesting for windsurfing anymore, which is really unfortunate. And local conditions like here, I wouldn't go windsurfing here because it's too gusty, and often you're driving around looking for wind that isn't there. So the foiling has been really interesting to bring windsurfing back to a lot of places, and make windsurfing more accessible and more fun, and give people more time on the water instead of just flying on holiday and renting equipment, or driving to, only flying to South Africa once a year, or driving to Denmark. Now you can actually be more on the water all the time, which is great. So I think that's something we're going to see more and more of. And that's good, because the more you do something, the more willing you are to spend money on it. So that's good for us, for Fanatic, of course, and for the rest of the industry, because it means we can reinvest more money back into the sport. And it means that people might, you see a lot of older people that were windsurfing before, and then it just became too much hassle, and then they were standing around they all just buy a €5,000 or €10,000 bicycle and go cycling because it's just easier. And they don't teach their kids to windsurf because it's just too much hassle. And now we're seeing a lot more families coming back into the sport, and the foiling can really help that to fast track the performance, because if you learn kiting, within a week you're up and going. You can jump after a week if you're relatively talented. And windsurfing takes forever to get into that planing stage. So the foiling has the potential to fast track people to get up to speed a lot quicker. And that's something we should be looking at as well with the schools and stuff. Is, do they really want to teach people on a 1 meter wide board for a week, and then 50 people at once with one boat, and then say, okay, that's your windsurfing lesson, ciao, see you next time? Or do they actually want people to progress? And that's something we've been pushing quite hard as well with a lot of the school associations, is to challenge them to get people into planing faster. And I think the foiling can help for that. So I think that part of windsurfing will grow a lot, and that's really important because it's the base of the sport, and getting kids. And I have to say, a lot more women are getting into windsurfing, which is really encouraging. My daughter and my wife both windsurf. I taught them, and my son as well. So that's really good to see. And it wasn't the case a few years ago. And I think we really have to work on that to make sure that they feel included. I'm old school, and I have to change my ways there as well. Get more girls into our team, as Lena always tells me.
Okay.
I think there's a lot that can be done for windsurfing, and I think the positives, we're going to see a positive development from out of this whole Corona thing towards more local windsurfing, which could be a nice turning point for windsurfing for sure.
Definitely.
It might be some harder times for the industry, but I think we'll see some positives coming out of it. Yeah.
Definitely. We're going to end this thing with a couple quick hitters.
Yeah.
That we ask everybody, so we can kind
long
of
answers.
Yeah.
Have a habit of doing too much.
Yeah, it's I think the older you get, the older person we have as a guest, the less questions I need to prepare. So it's just, I think with age you get a little bit more politically correct, and that just takes a few more words than yes or no.
Yeah.
But now you have the time to give your short ones. What are your pet peeves?
Pet peeves?
Yeah.
Inconsiderate people.
How many times a day do you pee your wetsuit?
Depends how cold it is.
Rough number? Cold. 5-4 weather.
At least 2 or 3 times. Who wouldn't?
That's nothing. Guilty pleasure.
Dark chocolate.
Your top 5 windsurfers of all time.
Whoa, the classics: Bjorn, Robbie, Jason, Francisco, and then of all time we would have to, and then Nick Baker.
All right. Foil freestyle, yes or no?
Yes, if you can do it.
Obstacles in slalom, yes or no?
No.
Beach starts then, yes or no?
With the foil or without?
Without. You've done them. I haven't done them. I've never done them.
Beach starts certainly make it interesting. Yeah.
And you have to run. I don't think these 45-year-olds can run, dude. One spot you'd have to sail every day for the rest of your life. You're locked. You have to sail every single day.
Big Bay, Cape Town.
Even with the people.
I'm local. I always know where to go.
Worst excess baggage bill of all time.
Ooh, Canaries. No, Malaysia. $2,000. The exact amount of prize money that I won at the event.
There you go. Most coffees you had in a day?
Wow. 6?
Not too bad either. Recently I read 50 kills you, so you're quite far of that.
Good to know. We got a new coffee machine.
Who was your worst competitor? The guy you hated to come up against?
Hated as a competitor or just hated to compete against?
Both? Give us both.
Probably Bjorn. Like, didn't hate him, but fucking no chance to beat him.
One movie everyone should watch.
I love movies, so there's so many. Couldn't say. Big Blue?
I thought you were going to go with the Avengers or something.
Or at least one Quentin Tarantino's films. They're all great.
Definitely. Last but not least, who would you like to hear on the show?
You said you already interviewed Jimmy, right?
Yeah. Come on, you watched that already.
Has it been on already? Did I miss it?
It's on when we publish your one.
Okay. Who would I like to see? Jeez, now I have to think. Windsurfer.
Windsurfer, industry member, media person, whatever. Good talker. Needs to be a good talker.
Good talker. I think if you want to have a good talker who has a good perspective, either maybe Svein from Starboard.
Definitely be interesting.
He has a good perspective of not just windsurfing, but of things in other sports, and yeah.
And with that very wise thought, which I have found out very much in real life, we'll end this podcast. Thank you,
Cool,
Craig, one more time.
Cool, man. Take care. Keep up the good work there.
Appreciate it.
Stay a character. We need more like you.
But you don't employ them.
But we need them.
Okay.
Cool,
Thanks.
man. Take it easy.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There we go. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope you enjoyed that one. For me, one of the most interesting ones we've had. Some real inside scoops there from the man, Craig Gertenbach. Let us know in the comments what you thought about it. Let us know if you like the industry ones or you prefer the professional sailor ones. We're always looking for feedback on these. And don't forget, you can chip in some beers. Yes, it's like a membership. Keeps the channel going. And we'll give Maciek a couple. I think he's deserved them. He's had a couple of really good weeks, and I think he's getting better and better the more podcasts we do. Give us a thumbs up like if you liked it, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the action. I'll link to a couple of the other ones up there, and stay tuned. Cheers for the support.